he had supported Stockton. He had supported Ericsson. He believed in steam propulsion.
But there was worse to come.
Now, up until that time, Stockton had literally taken credit for the whole thing, all of it, with the media. But when it happened, he backed away and said it's Ericsson's fault. He did it.
This was a disaster in public relations terms, and the United States Navy and Robert Stockton avoided the fallout by shifting all of the blame onto the one man that they could easily do, and that's the foreign John Ericsson. Ericsson is stigmatized by the failure of this gun, which is not his gun. The gun that Ericsson made is still in the Washington Navy Yard. It's not the one that blew up.
Well, Ericsson became not only disillusioned for obvious reasons with Stockton, but with the Navy as well. He simply backed away from having anything to do with the United States Navy.
Meanwhile, a chain of events was about to unfold in Europe that would reverberate around the world. On November 13th, 1853, at the Turkish port of Sinop on the Black Sea, a fleet of 6 Russian ships, armed with shell-firing guns, had engaged with and annihilated a squadron of Turkish frigates. The wooden fleet had burned to the waterline and sunk. They had no answer to the exploding shells.
Artillery had reached a point where there was no wooden ship that could not be penetrated by shells or by shots from those guns.
In 1854, the Crimean War began. An alliance was forged between Britain, Turkey, and France, and their joint navies began to lay siege to the Russian fortifications. The effectiveness of the Russian shell guns had been clearly demonstrated, and the Allies were well aware that to attack shore defenses from the sea was difficult and highly dangerous.
Whenever you developed a type of gun, like the shell gun, the Paxson shell gun, then you tried to develop, of course, some means of defending against it. And in this case, armor was what they needed.
At Kinburn, a Russian sand fortification on a spit of land, French ironclad batteries appeared for the first time. They weren't very maneuverable and had no real seagoing power, but when towed into position, they could bombard the land from within the range of the incoming shells.
The Russians, to their amazement, saw these ungainly, turtle-like ships crawling into action and were completely unable to do anything against them with any of the armament they had.
Everyone who saw what they did were impressed, because in a contest between shore fortifications or forts and armored-clad vessels, the armored-clad vessels came out, of course, quite well. That is, the shot from the forts simply bounced off of the armor.
The Crimean War had been a testing ground for the new technologies. Clearly, iron armor was effective, and so was steam power. The fact that Britain could take part in an extended campaign so far from home had owed much to the logistical support of steam. After victory in the Crimea, France and Britain reverted to their old rivalry, hurling themselves into yet another naval arms race. The French led the way with the appointment of Stanislas de Puy-de-Dôme as chief constructor of the Navy. He was a backer of new technology, and France's jealous rivals feared a breakthrough would be imminent. They were right.
Ironclad, armored ships were the future. The French, very ingenious, always looking for a chance to preempt the British power expressed in the Royal Navy, they developed a sea-going ironclad ship based on the same ideas as the armoured batteries that had been used in the bombardment of Kimburn, but in a much bigger ship that could go to sea, La Gloire.
La Gloire, launched in 1859, was an entirely new design of warship. The world's first sea-going ironclad. Although constructed of oak, she had an armored belt 4.5 inches thick running the entire length of her hull above the waterline, and an armored deck. She was powered by steam but sported a full rig of sails, and the barrels of her 36 guns were rifled for greater accuracy.
This caused an enormous stir in Britain and in the Admiralty, and there was a strong pressure on the government to produce something in response.
Whatever the French did, the British counteracted. In other words, it looked upon the French still as the potential enemy. And so when the French decided to build their ocean-going ironclad, the British agreed and laid down what would become HMS Warrior.
The Warrior could have sailed through every single battle fleet in the world and sunk them. Napoleon III referred to it as that black snake. He knew what the Warrior was capable of.
HMS Warrior, more than any other ship in history, made the battleship a thing of the industrial age.
Key point about Warrior, the use of iron as a structural material. We can see the mass-produced iron beams at every level, the iron bracket frames in the bottom, the use of iron to hold the whole ship together. There is timber in the ship, and it forms an essential function. These doubled-up sections of teak are, in fact, holding the 4.5-inch armor plate within this shelf structure. The important point about iron is it allowed Warrior to be built much, much bigger. This ship is nearly twice as big as Gloire, enables her to travel further, to carry more coal, more stores. It also enables her to travel faster.
Warrior was fitted with the best marine engine of her day. Built by Penns of Greenwich, it delivered more than 5,000 horsepower, by far the most powerful engine yet designed for a warship. She carried enough coal to steam over 2,000 miles at 11 knots. In fact, on the measured miles, she steamed at almost 14.5 knots, a speed that would not be surpassed by any battleship for years to come. When she was not under steam, 600 men could haul her 10-ton propeller clear of the waves, and she would sail like a clipper, with no loss of speed. Warrior could outreach and outrun any ship in the world, and she could also outgun them. Although she had only one gun deck, it was armed with an array of the most powerful weapons. Huge 68-pound muzzle loaders and the latest 110-pound rifle breech loaders. Her breech-loading guns were a world first and the very latest in naval development, having been introduced that year by the industrial pioneer William Armstrong. An iron block, the vent piece, was removed for loading and then replaced and tightened with a breech screw. Risk of backfire made it highly dangerous.
Each one of those items, the armor plating, the metal hull, the guns, and the engines, not one of those was absolutely new. Everything had been developed in other ships. What was revolutionary about the Warrior was that they all came together in one hull. And that made her quite genuinely the most revolutionary warship ever launched.